Welcome to Web Application Architecture and Structure presentation from JPassion.com. This is one of the topics that we cover as part of the Web Application Programming Basics course. So this is what we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about the concept of web application, web components, and web container. And we are going to look into technologies used in web application. And we are going to take a look at the steps that you can follow to build a very simple web application. And then we are going to look into what is called the WAR file, its internal structure. And then we are going to see web.xml file, which is web application deployment descriptor. So let's see what is web application and web components and web container. So in a web application or Java EE application environment, you could have web container running JSP and Servlet, and these JSP and Servlet might talk to backend EJB beans running an EJB container. It doesn't have to, but so JSP and Servlet could directly talk to some business logic, and or it could talk to some database. But in Java EE environment, it might talk to EJB, and EJB is the one that actually talks to database. And on the client side, you could have a browser talking to this JSP and Servlet by sending HTTP request. So web container basically contains these JSPs and servlets. Those are web components in this context. So when you hear servlet container, that is the same thing as web container. So just a little bit of repeat of what we just talked about in previous slide. So web components are in the form of either servlet or JSP. Actually, JSP pages are converted into, they are compiled into a servlet code. So web components are in the form of servlets mostly. And so web components run in web container. So typical examples of web containers are like a Tomcat, the most popular web containers, and Jetty is also a popular web container. As well as all Java EE compliant app servers such as Glassfish, WebSphere, WebLogic, JBoss, they provide web containers as well. So Java EE app servers, if you go back to our previous slide, they not only support, they not only include web container, but also EJB container as well. So it does include more than web container. On the other hand, a Tomcat just contains web container. It doesn't include EJB container. So web container provides system services to web components. For example, it handles request dispatching. So it will receive HTTP request, and it will select a particular servlet code, and then it will send the request to the servlet. It does also provide security services and lifecycle management services to the web components, meaning servlets. So web application, what is a web application? You can think of web application as a deployable unit, deployable package, which contains, of course, web components, again, servlets and JSPs. And it could contain static resource files such as images and HTML files and things like that. It might include some other Java classes and also some libraries. And then it also includes web.xml file. So these are the contents that make up web application, which is basically in the form of WAR file, or it could be exploded directory structure of the WAR file. Okay? So WAR file is a single file. It's like a jar file that contains all this. So let's move on to technologies used in web application. So this is a web container or web server. So web server So web server or web container receive HTTP request from the browser, and then it will select web component, one of the web component for handling it. So web component might actually use some Java Beans component, or it might talk to JB, or it might actually talk to database, and then it will create the response message and send it back to the client. So this is how things work. So web application technologies, underneath you have a Java servlet, and then JSP pages are in fact compiled into Java servlet when they are deployed. And then there is what is called Java Server Pages Standard Tag Library, JSTL. So we're going to look into JSTL later on as part of this course. And then there is another technology called the Java Server Faces. So these are all built on the top of Java Servlet. Okay, so let's move on to development and deployment steps. So these are the steps you can follow to build a very simple, actually this is the step that you're going to follow for building good size application as well. So pretty similar step. So you're going to write a web component code, servlet or JSP, and then you might have some helper classes that are being used by the servlet, and then you're going to create some static resources, so for example, images and HTML pages and the CSS files and things like that. And you're going to create also web.xml file, and then you're going to build a WAV file, or you could have expanded form of this WAV file that could be picked up by the app server for deployment. And then you're going to deploy that web application into web container. Once it's deployed, then clients can now access to the application by sending HTTP request. So first step, write and compile the web component code. So create development tree structure. So whatever development tree structure that you're going to maintain source code as well as JSP pages, HTML files, and images and things like that. And write either servlet code or JSP pages, a combination of both, along with some helper code that might be used by the servlet or JSP. And if you are building that application using Ent, then you might actually build the build.xml file. If you're using Maven, then you have to create what is called the pom.xml file. If you're using IDE, then that's probably the best choice. So IDE handles all this directory structure and creating the build script and all that stuff for you. So development tree structure. So you want to keep your source code from the compiled files, binary files, so it facilitates iterative development. So you might have build.xml file if you're using Ent. Again, in this course we are going to use NetBeans, so you don't have to worry about Ent file. And again, source directory and web directory. Source, you are going to maintain Java source code, typically servlets and some Java Beans. On the web, you are going to have JSP pages and HTML pages and images. So suppose if you're building a very simple application called Hello2, so this is the structure that you could have. So on the source, you could have servlets, and you have greeting servlet.java and response servlet.java. On the web directory, you have web.INF, and on the web.INF, you have web.xml file, and on the web, you could have other some static resources such as images and HTML files and things like that. And again, if you're using Ent, you might have build.xml file. Now, next, you're going to create some static resources such as HTML pages. So, it could be the pages for your application, it could be login page, it could be also error page. So when there is an error, you want to display error page. Image files that are used by the HTML pages or JSP pages. So, this could be an example of GIF file. GIF file could be the image file. And then you're going to create the deployment descriptor called the web.xml file. So we are going to take a look at the web.xml file in detail in a few minutes. Basically, this deployment descriptor contains deployment time, runtime instructions to the web container. So it contains all the information that is needed by the web container to deploy the application, including the most important aspect. The most important information that is mentioned in web.xml file is a URL the client uses to access the web component. Okay, so again, we are going to take a look at this URL later on in detail. So every web application has to have web.xml file as long as that web application is built on Java EE5 and under. Java EE6 actually make the web.xml file not necessary. Okay, so if you're building Java EE6 application, you might not see web.xml file, even though web.xml file is still being supported on Java EE6, but it doesn't have to have web.xml file. If you're building Java EE5 application or Java EE4 application, then you have to have web.xml file as part of your application. And then you're going to build web application. It could be in the form of WAR file, or it could be unpacked form of WAR file, or exploded form of WAR file. So you are going to create a build directory, and so you are going to compile all the Java code, and then the Java code, compiled Java code, is going to be located on the web-INF/classes directory. Okay. And then you might actually have to copy web.xml file into web-INF directory, and then image files into build directory. So this is again when you're actually using Ent or you're trying to build things manually. Okay, so these things are all done by, for example, IDE, example like a NetBeans and Eclipse. This is all done for you. So this is the tree structure. So on the build directory, you might want to the exploded form of WAR file. Okay, so all the Java code has to be on the web-INF and the classes directory. And web-INF web.xml file has to reside right on the web-INF directory. And then image files such as static files, so static resource files such as images could actually reside any place, but it is typically in the root, or it could be actually inside web-INF as well. But what's important is the servlet code, servlet class file has to reside on the classes, otherwise it's not going to be found, and web.xml file has to reside right on the web-INF directory. Then you're going to deploy web application. So deploy the application over any web container supported environment such as Tomcat or Glassfish. So you can deploy your application in many different ways. If you're using an IDE such as NetBeans and Eclipse, then it's pretty simple. In NetBeans you're going to just right-click the project and click Run. Or in Eclipse you're going to select the project and right-click it and then select the run as and run on server. So that's probably the easiest way of doing it. But you can also deploy your application at the command line. You can, for example, in the case of Glassfish, so this is the command. You can use asadmin and deploy the port number and then the host, a password file, and then WAR file. Okay. Or you can use admin console of particular the app server. So in this case, you can deploy your web application through Glassfish admin console. So several different means of deploying your application. And then from the client, you can access the web application. So client will specify HTTP URL, and then that application will be accessed. In this case, hello1 is the application context that identifies that particular application, and greeting is indicating a particular web component. And then the user can access the application by typing the name and click submit. Then it will access probably another web component or say web component. That web component again generate HTTP response message, and then that gets displayed to the client. Okay, so let's look into WAR file, Web Application Archive, in a bit more detail. So web application can be deployed in different forms, as we talked about. It could be WAR file, or it could be exploded form or unpacked directory of this WAR file. So the reason the WAR file could be actually useful is the case scenario, deployment scenario where WAR file is useful is that when you need to deploy your web application on a remote machine, obviously a single WAR file is preferred form rather than exploded directory. Okay. In fact, the remote server might not be able to access that exploded directory, so in that case, WAR file is the only option. So what is a WAR file? So it is deployment unit. It is ready to deployable package over web container, and it's like a jar file that contains all the things that are needed for deployment of that application. So it contains again web components such as servlets and JSPs and utility classes, and then some static resources such as HTML page, images, and things like that. So it basically reflects the things that are on the build directory. So again, if the build directory is the one that contains the compiled code and the things that need to be deployed, it just reflects the WAR file. Concept of document root. So document root of the web application is basically top level directory of the WAR file. So it might contain JSP pages and client-side classes and archives and static web resources. And it also contains WEB-INF directory. So this WEB-INF directory is something that is named as WEB-INF, and then so document root of any web application should contain WEB-INF directory. The concept of context. Context is a name that gets mapped to the document root of the web application. So in our case, when we are running an application, for example, this hello1 is context. So it is context of this application. So this is identifying this particular application in a web container. So if the web container is deploying multiple web applications, each application should have a context that identifies that particular application. And in this case, this hello1 is the context. It's an ID of this particular application in the container. Okay, so context is a name that gets mapped to the document root of the web application. So in our case, hello1 is the context of hello1 example. So it distinguishes this particular web application in a web container if the web container maintains multiple web applications, and has to be specified as part of the client URL. So when the client is trying to access that web application, it should provide that context. So directory structure of WAR file. So this is the web application name. So that's the context that we just talked about. And then it should contain WEB-INF directory. On the WEB-INF directory, it contains classes directory in which all the servlet code needs to be maintained. And WEB-INF also might have some library files. And then WEB-INF also contains web.xml file deployment descriptor. So this is another picture. So here, on the WEB-INF, you have classes. You might also have tags and libraries and web.xml file. And on the document root, you might have JSP pages and the static resources such as HTML pages and images. And if you're deploying applet classes might be in that directory as well. So how to create a WAR file? So 3 different ways. Again, we are going to mostly focus on usage of IDE in this course, like a NetBeans. So you can use NetBeans or Eclipse, JDeveloper, IntelliJ IDEA, or Maven. You can use Maven. Maven could be used at the command line, or you can use Maven inside your IDE. So, you know, all the IDEs these days, all the modern IDEs, they understand Maven project. So in fact, Maven is becoming more preferred scheme of building any Java application. Or you can use Ant tool, or you can actually create a WAR file directly yourself by using jar command. So, you know, assuming you have a build directory that reflect all the things that are needed to build the WAR file, then you can say jar cvf and the name of the file and then WAR file. Then the WAR file gets created. Okay? Again, we are mostly focused on usage of IDE in this course. So this is a case that you're using ant command. So, you know, ascent is ant command from Glassfish. So you can say ant create war, and then, you know, you can see it's creating WAR file. You know, basically creating making sure the WEB-INF directory is available, and then it will copy all the classes on the classes directory and things like that. So it's basically creating the WAR file from various pieces it knows about. So this is a case that you are manually creating a WAR file. So jar and cvf hello 2.war, and then current directory. So current directory in this case should reflect your WAR file directory structure. Okay, and then once it's created, you can say jar xpf and hello 2.war file. Then it should have image file. Well, if it does have image file, and yeah, this one doesn't look right. Okay, my apologies. So when you actually, you know, the xpx WAR file, it should have web.inf and all that stuff. Okay, so moving forward, web.inf directory is a subdirectory of document root. It contains web.xml file, and it should contain the classes directory, and it could, if you have a Servlet code or any Java code. And the live directory contains any library jar files that are needed for this particular application. So HTTP request URL and web component URL, alias and context. So, you know, when the client accessing the web application, it will send the URL in the form of HTTP : and name of the host and port number, and hello1 is that context of that application. And greeting is actually reflecting a particular web component. So it could be JSP page, or it could be a servlet. And then this is the query parameters. So context in this case, hello1 is context. All right, so let's look into web.xml file a bit. So all the configuration information need to be specified in the web.xml file, and web.xml file sometimes it's called the web application deployment descriptor. So it contains a lot of information. It could contain a lot of information, but the most important information that it needs to contain is what is called its alias path. So this is URL path. Okay, so it's a URL mapping in a sense. So when the user is sending some URL, how a particular servlet or JSP will be selected to handle that URL. So that's basically alias path we are talking about. So that's the most important information you have to specify in the web.xml file. But you can specify a lot of other things. So we're going to take a look at these things in a bit more detail in the rest of this presentation. The things that you specify in the web.xml file is case sensitive, and it's also order sensitive. So things need to be specified in the order like this. Okay, so again, the things that are relatively important is like servlet. That's actually alias mapping that we talked about, servlet mapping, and error code, error page, and things like that. So let's actually look into these things in a bit more detail. Prologue is just XML, the document thing, nothing really important. So this is alias path. So when a request is received by servlet container, the servlet container must determine which web component, meaning which servlet or JSP in which web application should handle the request. So it does so by mapping URL path contained in the request to a web component. Okay? So suppose the URL that is coming from the client is in this form. Again, it has a context and then alias path. Okay? So context path is identifying a particular application, right? Then alias path is in the form of either some kind of alias string for servlet, or it could be a JSP page, start.jsp page, xyz.jsp page, things like that. So this is how you specify alias path for servlet. So you have to have a servlet. So we have defined the two servlets in this example. So the first servlet, you have servlet name element, and display name is not really important. Okay. So what is important is a servlet, and description is not that much important. What is important is the actual servlet class, the greeting servlet. And this greeting servlet, the class file needs to be specified, needs to be located on the, again, web.inf/classes directory. So if you have greetings the servlet, the JSP greeting servlet, the class file in different location, then you are the servlet container will not be able to find it, and you're going to receive. User is going to experience 404 error. Okay, so servlet, this is important. Servlet name and servlet class. Okay, and then you have to have a servlet mapping. So for this servlet, it will handle URL pattern of /greeting. So if the user sent URL that has localhost :8080/context root /greeting, then this is the servlet. Greeting servlet is the one that handles that particular request. The second servlet is called the response, and the actual servlet class is response servlet.class file. Okay, and again, the URL that it can handle is /response. Okay. So this servlet name is used to specify servlet mapping. So here, this is response and this is response. And again, inside the servlet, you specify the servlet class, and then servlet mapping, you specify the URL pattern that this particular servlet should handle. Okay, context and initialization parameters. So you could define some the context, and that could be accessible in your web application. Okay, so for example, in this case is localization context, and this is parameter value. So later on in your web application, you can access the value of this value from the application context by using this one as a key. Okay, listener is received the servlet lifecycle event. So we're going to talk about this servlet lifecycle events when you talk about the servlet. And filter mappings. The servlet has a concept of the filter. So again, we are going to talk about the concept of filter later on when we talk about advanced servlets. So basically you can think of filter is the class that intercept the incoming HTTP request, and it does something, and then it will pass it to the servlet or JSP page. Okay, so in this case, the name of the filter is order filter, and this is the actual class, and this filter will handle this URL pattern. So any URL that ends with /receipt will be taken care of by this filter first, and then it will send back. It will send to the servlet. That again handles this URL pattern. Okay, error message. If there is order exception, the order exception in your web application, this error page.html file will be displayed. So this is the response, the page for this particular exception. Okay, so references. Yeah, so this is something that we are going to talk about later on in a bit more detail. So this is example of web.xml file of hello2, very simple application. So here we define two servlet and two servlet mapping. Okay, and each of this servlet mapping is, so they are related through the servlet name, greeting servlet, and response servlet here, response servlet and response servlet. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. So let's take a look at the hands-on lab of web application structure. So in this hands-on lab, we are going to talk about how you can install the JDK and NetBeans that you need to build a web application. And then we are going to build a very simple web application. And then we are going to study the web application that you just built. Okay? So the thing you need is you need a JDK. So you can go to download page of JDK. And then you can download JDK. So you can download JDK, or you can download actually NetBeans or Java EE. So in this case, is the NetBeans JDK 7 to NetBeans bundle, or JDK 7 and Java EE bundle. So you can actually download NetBeans together. Okay. In this case, we are going to download individually just for the sake of this exercise. So you can download JDK 7 or JDK 6, or either this one or this one. Okay, and once you download and install it, the next you are going to install the NetBeans. So you go to NetBeans website, and then you are going to download NetBeans. NetBeans that contain Java EE piece. So either this one or you can select all, and it includes everything. So either this one or this one, and you're going to install NetBeans. Okay, so exercise 1 is creating a very simple web application. So I'm going to actually use this documentation because things are pretty simple. So first you are going to create the NetBeans project. So click File, New Project, and then you are going to see this Choose Project, a New Project, and Choose Project pane. So select Java Web and then select Web Application. Since we are building this application from scratch, we are not selecting Web Application with existing source, and Web Freeform Application is when you have the end-based project. Okay? So here, select Web Application, and then you provide the name of your project. So we are going to name it as My First Web App, or whatever name of your choice. And we are building that application in a project location. So this project location is any place that you are maintaining this NetBeans project. And go to Next. Then it's going to ask you to select a server. So choose Glassfish version v3. Okay, and in terms of Java EE version, if you're using NetBeans 6.9 and after, you might see Java EE 6 as a default. Here we are going to experiment with the web.xml files. So choose Java EE 5. And the context path. So remember the discussion we had, the context path. So this context path identifies this particular application when it is deployed in a web container. And finish. So now you have My First Web App project. So it already created a JSP page. We haven't talked about the JSP page yet. So this is in fact up and running application. So you can actually click right click your project and then select Run. Then it will run the project. So in fact that's what we do. So right click the project and click Run. Then it will build it, and then it will deploy it. So client should specify this localhost :8080 and /myfirstwebapp, and this gets displayed. Okay, so it gets automatically displayed, by the way, by NetBeans. Okay, but client can also access this URL from a browser to see this hello world message. Okay, so we haven't talked about JSP page yet, but JSP page is like a servlet. It's a one, the web component, one of the web components. So you can just change this title and the word that gets displayed. So, and then you're running again, then you're going to see different message. So next step is we are going to add a servlet to the application. So right click it and select new. Then you're going to select servlet because we are adding a servlet. And then new servlet, the window gets displayed. So you're going to provide the name of the class that will reflect the servlet. So here we are going to call it my own servlet. And this is the package that you're going to create my own servlet, the Java file. So another thing, so when you click next, it's going to also let you configure servlet deployment. So, the servlet name is this and the URL pattern. So by specifying this URL pattern, by the way, this is out of field by the NetBeans IDE. So this URL pattern will be used to create the web.xml file. Remember the discussion we had in the web.xml file that the servlet will have a URL pattern on the servlet mapping element. So this is what gets included in that servlet mapping. You can certainly change this one, like my own servlet XYZ. In that case, URL has to be in the form of / my own servlet XYZ. Otherwise, this particular servlet will not be invoked. Okay, so now we have a JSP page on the web pages, and then we also have my own servlet, the Java file on the my own package on the source package. And we are going to modify the IDE generated my own servlet code. So basically what we are going to do is we are going to uncomment. So this is the code that gets generated by the IDE. So in fact, this is ready to run servlet. And you can display some information here, but it's commented out as a default. So you're going to uncomment this. Okay. So now you are going to have this out.println to be executed. So in this case, it's going to just display response message. Servlet, my own servlet at, and then it will call the context path. So remember the context path identifies particular application, right? And so this is what you do, uncomment this guy. And then when you run the application, you can see this peace to the world that you, basically. Okay, so what we haven't done was we have to specify the URL / my own servlet, okay? Because without it, it will actually go to index.jsp page. In order to access my own servlet, then you have to specify the URL / my own servlet, okay? And this is a context path that we display, using this. So request is HTTP request object. Then you can call the get context path method to get the context path. Okay, moving forward, change the relative URL in the application. So here, when you select the properties of your project and then select run, this is relative URL. This is actually NetBeans thing. So what it means is that if you specify the relative URL, whenever you are running this application, this relative URL will be attached to the application URL automatically, meaning client URL automatically. So instead of typing this one to access this application, if you set the relative URL and then run the application, then it goes to, the URL, client URL will include this my own servlet at the end. Okay, so you don't have to specify it. Instead, the NetBeans actually does it for you. Okay, so this is typically useful for development purpose, so that whenever you make a change, and run the application, then it automatically goes my own servlet. Okay, so under 5, we are adding new JSP page called my own JSP page, my own JSP.jsp file to the application. Okay, so again, we haven't talked about JSP, but so for the sake of this exercise, because this is a simple exercise, let's do it anyway. So new and JSP, and I'm going to call it my own JSP. So this JSP page gets created. Okay. You can see JSP page is like HTML page. Okay. So here we are going to change the title my own JSP, and the body will contain hello Boston. And then when you run the application, then you can add slash my own JSP.jsp page, and then you can see the this page gets displayed. Okay, so that is my first web application. Okay, so in fact that is provided as a solution, so you can actually open that project. So go to open project, and on the solutions directory of your hands-on lab. So if you unzip the file, you should see web app/architecture, and on the solutions you can open this one and open project. So since I already opened it, okay, so if you run the application, this is what we actually see. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna actually again to use the documentation to explain and study my first web app application. So let's take a look at the project structure in the files view. So click files, and then it will give you So this is the files structure. So let's take a look at the files structure, and then you're going to see the on the build it contains web directory, and on the web directory it contains WEB-INF, and WEB-INF it contains JSP files, and on the SRC it contains Java and my own package and things like that. Okay. So what's important is actually WAR file structure. So if you build this application, okay, so let's try to build it, then it will create the clean build. So it will create the WAR file here, my first that WAR file. So if you go to again files, and on the distribution, this is a WAR file. So if you see the structure, you can see WEB-INF here, right? And on the WEB-INF you have classes, and on the classes you have a Java servlet code, right? Because my own servlet.java is contained inside my own package, so you can see all the classes should be on the WEB-INF/classes directory, and then WEB-INF is on the WEB-INF directory. I'm sorry, the web.xml file should be on the WEB-INF directory. So you can actually see web.xml file in the XML form. So here you can see we have a very simple servlet mapping. So for this servlet called the my own servlet, this is the class, right? And in terms of mapping, for this servlet, this is the URL mapping it can handle. Okay. And then we have a session timeout and welcome page list. So welcome file list is that when you run the application, this JSP page will be displayed first. Okay. Okay, so we examine the WAR file, right? And web.xml file, we just look into web.xml file. And so modify web.xml file to use my own JSP as a default JSP to be displayed. So you create the you modify my own JSP page like this, and then you are going to set welcome file list to use a particular JSP page, and then when you run the application, a file inside the welcome file list will be used to display the first page. Okay. And now in terms of my own servlet, so remember the URL pattern, this is the pattern on the servlet mapping, is the pattern that this particular servlet should handle, right? So if you change the URL pattern to something like this, my own servlet use different URL, and then save it, and then when you try to access with my own servlet, it's not going to work because this URL is not going to be handled by the servlet anymore because we changed this URL pattern. So instead, you have to specify my own servlet use different URL to access that particular servlet. Okay, so deployment. So in order to see whether that application is deployed or not, you can go to the Services tab, and then you select the server. And if you expand the web application, you should see your application deployed right here. And if you want to undeploy it, right-click it and select undeploy. Okay, so that's the end of this presentation and hands-on lab. Thank you very much.